Good evening. I'm State Senator Jason Lewis. Thank you so much for joining us for our town hall. Very excited to have you with us and to hear your feedback and your questions for me this evening. All right, let's dive right into it. We have a brief presentation that we'll use to kind of kick off the town hall, but we'll spend the bulk of our time this evening doing the best I can to answer the questions that you have for me and to hear your feedback. So here's the plan. We're going to kick it off with a brief overview of the Massachusetts state budget process, which we are nearing the finish line for this year. I will share a few of the highlights from the State Senate's budget that we passed back in May. And then after that, we'll move to the question and answer portion of the town hall. And you're welcome to ask questions around the budget if there is any issues, topics that I didn't address that you'd like to dig into further. And then, of course, any other topics that you'd like to bring up. Would prefer to kind of stay focused on state and local issues, but obviously with everything that's happening nationally, if you do want to bring up something around a national or federal issue, I can also do my best to address that. And the way you should ask your questions is by typing them into the YouTube live chat, just the same way we've done it during our past town halls. And then I want to thank Paul Albright from my office, who's here with me at the State House. And Paul helped organize the town hall and get the word out. And he's also monitoring when you type in questions or feedback, and he will then display those questions so that I can see them and everybody else attending the town hall can see them as well. All right. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule. So here's kind of an overview that we took from the Mass Budget and Policy Center, which just explains how the state creates our budget each year. And unlike the federal government, we do have to pass a state budget each year. It has to pass the House, the Senate. We have to reconcile differences between them. It then has to get signed into law by Governor Healy, and it has to be a balanced budget. The revenues that we're projecting to receive during the fiscal year have to be sufficient to cover the spending that's contained in the budget. We cannot run a deficit like the federal government can. So the process begins in January each year when the governor puts forward her initial proposal for the fiscal year that starts July 1st. So that's when the fiscal year Massachusetts starts, is July 1st, and then it runs through June 30th of the following year. The next step in the process is that the House of Representatives takes up the budget, and that's typically in April. They debate the budget. They typically have many hundreds of amendments that state representatives file. Some of those are adopted, some of them are not. And then that is sent over to the Senate, which then takes up the budget in May. So that was, the Senate was very busy last month with reviewing the budget that was sent over from the House, reviewing the governor's original budget, taking into consideration all the feedback that we had gotten from constituents and stakeholders over the last several months. And also there were a number of public hearings that were held also to solicit feedback from the public. And senators, including myself, filed, dozens and dozens, or in total hundreds of amendments. And again, some of those were included in the final Senate budget, some were not. And then a conference committee was formed, which consists of 3 senators and 3 representatives. And their job is to reconcile the differences between the versions of the budget passed by the House and Senate. And we are now in the conference committee, and we are hopeful that the conference committee will reach a final agreement on all the different elements in the budget. We will then have a final vote as soon as the conference committee produces that final budget, which will hopefully be by the end of this month or early July. And then it is sent to Governor Healy for her review. and she can veto. She has line item power, so she can veto individual items in the budget. She can also send back some changes that she'd like to see, and of course can sign the budget into law. So this is the process we go through every year, and it's the most important responsibility that we have in the Massachusetts state legislature. Let's move to the next slide. So here's a little bit of the context for this year. In last year's budget, state budget was almost $58 billion. And this year's budget that passed in the Senate was modestly increased from that amount to $61.4 billion. And again, that's based on the revenue projection for next fiscal year that was previously agreed to between the House, the Senate, and the governor. And that, again, as I said before, determines how much spending can be included in the budget. Most of that increase from fiscal year last year to this year is for non-discretionary items in the budget. That's things like our Mass Health program, which is the state's Medicaid program, school funding, which is also known as the Chapter 70 program. That's state funding for local school districts, employee health insurance, state employee health insurance, and other some other fixed costs like that. The budget doesn't raise any taxes, and we also are not tapping into our stabilization fund, which is very important that we protect those funds so that if or when we face a true rainy day, like major federal cuts, which might be on the horizon, or a recession, we're in a position to tap into that fund to prevent big budget cuts. And there was bipartisan support for the budget that passed the Senate. We pride ourselves on most of the budgets that we do pass have support from both Democrats and Republicans. And then also worth noting that there's a significant new revenue stream that we are now benefiting from in Massachusetts, and that's as a result of the passage of the Fair Share Amendment a few years ago, also known as the Millionaire's Tax. And I was very proud to be the lead Senate sponsor of the Fair Share Amendment and to campaign for its passage for many years. So far, the revenues that the state's been taking in from that fair share tax, which is an additional 4% income tax on household income that's above $1 million a year, that has actually been exceeding our projections. So that has been going even better than expected. And that has enabled us to make the state legislature and the governor to make investments in public education, public higher education, the MBTA, improving roads and bridges, well beyond what would have otherwise been possible. So that so far has been a big success. On the federal side, of that total state budget of roughly $60 billion, about $16 billion of that comes from federal funding. So I often get the question, how reliant are we in Massachusetts on federal dollars? We are certainly reliant. $16 billion is a significant chunk of our budget. We are not as reliant on federal funding as many other states are, particularly red states. But nevertheless, it is an important part of what makes up our budget. And the biggest risk factor right now is the uncertainty we're facing with what is going to happen at the federal level. Mainly the bill that is moving through the Republican-controlled Congress. And that bill is very concerning because it has some very major cuts to programs like Medicaid and SNAP, which is food benefits, and a variety of other programs. And if those programs are reduced in any way, then either the states would have to try to make up the difference, which in most cases won't be possible, or that would mean making cuts to the beneficiaries of those programs. And we don't know what's going to happen yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but that is the major, that is certainly keeping us up at night right now as we go through the budget process. All right, the next slide just shares a few highlights here that were included in the Senate's budget that, again, we passed back in May. We have $7 billion, more than $7 billion in the budget for K-12 public education. That is an increase of almost $500 million over last year. And we also are ensuring that every school district will get at least a minimum of $150 increase per pupil. That's an historic level. We've never done so-called minimum aid at anything close to that level before. And that basically is a recognition of the challenges that are facing so many of our cities and towns, the fiscal challenges. That has to do with the high inflation we had for several years, the fact that all the pandemic federal aid that the cities and towns received and school districts received, a lot of that has now been exhausted. There's some other factors, rising special education costs, things like that. So in recognition of that, the Senate is really trying to do as much as we can in this budget to help our municipalities, especially our schools. There's also $1.3 billion in the budget, which is for what's called unrestricted aid. That's just money that the state provides to municipalities, cities and towns, and then they can use it however they see fit. So they can use it for public safety, senior services, library services, whatever they see fit. And that's also an increase over last year. There is also a historic level of investment for early education and childcare programs. This is really an area we've been focused on for a number of years now. I'm proud to be the chair, to again be serving this session as the chair of the Education Committee, and our responsibility actually includes early education and childcare in addition to K-12 education. So I've been very focused the last few years on efforts to improve access to high quality care for working families, trying to make care more available, more affordable, and really supporting our early education providers and our workforce in that space. And this budget really continues that commitment. We also have well over $1 billion for housing initiatives because we have such a difficult housing market for so many people, both the cost of renting an apartment as well as the cost of trying to buy a home. So we are trying to the state has been, again, under both previous Governor Baker and now Governor Healy, really working to try to increase housing production, more multifamily housing, housing at different price points and suitable for different income levels. And this budget, again, tries to continue making those, making those investments. Mental health and healthcare in general is always a critical part of the state budget. In fact, the Mass Health Program is the single largest part of the budget, second largest being funding for K-12 public schools. And I should point out that Mass Health, which is the state's Medicaid program, is funded roughly half with state dollars and the other half with federal dollars. So this is where so much of that federal money that we rely on, really comes into the state budget. That's why you've heard so much talk about these potential Medicaid cuts in the Republican bill that's moving through Congress, because federal funding for Medicaid is so critical to state budgets, including here in Massachusetts. And then finally, there's also almost $500 million for various environmental initiatives, for the Department of Environmental Protection, for Department of Conservation and Recreation, and our efforts to continuing mitigating climate change. All right. So that was obviously just a very brief overview, both of the process and some of the highlights. The budget has hundreds of line items in it, addressing, so many different areas within the state. So what I gave you on that one slide was really the very, very brief elevator pitch. But happy to answer more questions that you might have about the budget and where we go from here and the impact of what's happening in Washington on our budget. And of course, any other topics that you want to bring up, legislation that you're interested in, or issues that are affecting our district, whatever's on your mind, feel free to go ahead and type those questions or feedback into the chat, and Paul will pop it on the screen. And here we have the first one from Councillor Steve Winslow in Malden. Thank you so much, Councillor, for your public service and for joining us tonight. And you are letting us know that Urban Media Arts, or UMA, which is Malden's cable access or community media, unfortunately, we got the bad news that they had to lay off some staff last week. So thank you for bringing up this issue. It's been one that I've been really passionate about. in all the time that I've served in the legislature, I've made a point of visiting our community media or local cable access stations regularly to provide a Beacon Hill update for them so they can share it with their viewers. And our community media stations are instrumental in providing quality local programming for our communities, especially around what's happening with local government. The city council, select board, school committee meetings, especially during and since the pandemic, when more of those meetings have been hybrid. It makes it even more important that the public is able to, access those meetings and follow what's happening in the community and also all the different events that they cover. With the decline in print journalism, that's made it even more, important to have quality community media. The challenge they're facing is that the way they are funded traditionally is through a modest fee on cable subscriber bills. But because people are ending their cable subscriptions, some people are, and switching over to just streaming services like Hulu or Netflix or Apple TV, Google TV, that is reducing the revenue that is available to fund community media. And that is a real problem that community media stations and advocates for community media have been talking about for a number of years. And I've certainly been talking about this a lot. So I filed legislation working with Mass Access, that is the association that represents community media. And last session, we managed to get the bill favorably through committee, which was a big step forward. So that was good news. And now we're pushing this session to try to, get that bill to come to the floor and hopefully come up for a vote in both branches. So it's in process now, but we just need to continue, pushing to raise awareness of the challenges facing community media, how important community media is to our local communities, and that this bill is a potential solution. The bill would replace that lost cable subscription revenues with a modest fee on streaming services. So it would be the same idea basically, because people are switching from cable to streaming. We would replace that lost revenue stream with a new one that would enable us to continue to have robust local community media. So thanks for that question, Steve. All right, let's see, we have a question from Lynn. The impact anticipated of removing immigrants from the state's economy, lost scientific research funding, laying off federal workers. Yep. So yes, thank you, Lynn. And these are all, just these terrible, policies that have been coming out of the Trump administration, basically from the beginning of this year. These are all policies that are, already having an adverse impact on Massachusetts and other states, and and potentially the impacts could get worse depending on what happens with all the legal challenges, that are making their way through the courts right now, because almost all these policies, have faced legal challenges in some cases from our state attorney general, Andrea Campbell, who's doing a great job, fighting back and joined by many other attorneys general. And in some cases from groups like the ACLU and school groups and other organizations that have sued. But, we are very concerned about what this means for our state's workforce. We have a low unemployment rate. We need more workers in Massachusetts as our population ages, not fewer workers. Immigrants are critical to not only our workforce, but also have started many businesses and have been the backbone, have been critical to the success of our state's economy, especially in sectors like biotech. And in terms of scientific research, I think Massachusetts receives more funding per capita for scientific research than I think any other state. So cuts in funding for research for our universities and hospitals and so on is devastating, and obviously not just on the impact on our economy, but the impact on our scientists who are doing that work, and the impact on the development of innovative new therapies and scientific breakthroughs that maybe slow down or we may not even realize because of these misguided cuts in funding. So again, we are trying to manage the situation as best we can. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do at the state level. But again, I am hopeful that with some of the lawsuits that are out there, that we can stop a lot of the worst impact of these policies. And in some cases that we will be able to step in through state programs and state resources to mitigate some of the harmful impacts. All right, let's see, we have a question here about what's happening in the Education Committee to continue to support our students, and especially regarding cell phone usage. Yeah, this is certainly a hot topic around the country and in our own communities. I'm proud to be serving again this session as the Senate Chair of the Education Committee, and we have over 300 bills that have been filed by representatives and senators that are, pending were assigned to the Education Committee. So we are working our way through those bills, and each of them gets a public hearing, so the public can weigh in. And in fact, last week, I think it was last week, we had a hearing on bills related to school climate and safety. And that included about a dozen bills that deal with the issue of student use of cell phones and other personal devices during the school day. And we heard very compelling testimony from some students, from teachers, from parents and advocacy groups, school administrators, about the harmful impact, of students really using their cell phones during the school day, and the impact that's been having on student mental health and also students' learning. We know that many of our school districts at this point have policies restricting the use of phones and other devices in classrooms, and a number of other states have passed statewide prohibitions. So this is something that I believe we will act on this session. You can anticipate that the Education Committee will be releasing a bill to take action in this area very soon, perhaps even by the end of this week. So this is definitely one of our priority issues to address. All right, we have a question from Rebecca. Thank you for this, about the state trying to backfill funding gaps with Medicaid or SNAP. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, and I have to just be direct here. And the amount of federal money that we're talking about when it comes to these two programs in particular is billions of dollars that we rely on in federal money for the federal share of Medicaid, which is our mass health program, and also for SNAP, which is virtually 100% funded by federal dollars. And so if there are significant cuts like what was passed by the House of Representatives a month or so ago, there's really no way that the state can make that up. We do have a rainy day fund that I mentioned, but that's really for one-time money that wouldn't be able to make up cuts on an ongoing basis. So maybe around the edges, we could make some additional investments, but really, we would not be able to just step in and fill the shoes of the federal government if they make those kinds of cuts that they are discussing. So we know that our congressional delegation is really fighting back and doing what they can to try to prevent the bill from passing the Senate, at least in the form that it's in right now. It's a very regressive bill that they're talking about in terms of providing most of the tax cuts for very wealthy households, and then helping pay for that by cutting funding for programs that help lower income and middle income folks. So it's totally the opposite of what we've been doing in Massachusetts successfully. I just hope that congressional Senate Democrats and hopefully some Republicans will step up and either kill the bill completely or make major changes to it so that we aren't going to be facing these kinds of budget cuts. All right, we have a question from Alan. Governor Healy had creative new proposals in her budget for changes to the Mass Save program. Thanks, Alan, for that. There are, I'm not sure of the status of any Mass Save changes that are in the budget that is we're working on now. We can get back to you on that actually and look that up. So I'll ask Paul to note that we should follow up with you. But what you may also be aware of is that the governor filed separate from the budget an energy and climate bill that includes a lot of different strategies to try to make energy more affordable for Massachusetts residents and businesses. And it includes a number of changes and reforms to the Mass Save program. That bill just had a hearing. I think actually it's having its hearing in the legislature this week. So the bill will be heard, have a public hearing, and the committee that's responsible for that bill, which I believe is the TUE committee, Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, will then recommend how to move forward with that. But that's probably the main vehicle that we'll be looking at potentially, making changes and updates to Mass Save. But rest assured, no matter what's happening on the federal level in terms of Republicans walking away from our commitment to addressing climate change, we are not going to walk away on the state level. We've, as you know, have passed major successive bills to promote the development of clean energy, like offshore wind and solar, to promote energy efficiency, to convert, our transportation sector to electrify it, as well as buildings. And we're going to continue to make those efforts a priority in this state. All right, we have a question here about the Middlesex Fells. Thank you so much for that. It's near and dear to my heart. I love to go and walk in the Fells and enjoy it whenever I have free time. One of the things that I did a few years ago was team up with Representative Paul Donato from Medford, and we created the Middlesex Fells Legislative Caucus. So that is a way to bring together legislators who represent the communities in and around the Middlesex Fells. And that caucus meets periodically. We work with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. We work with the Friends of the Fells. We work with other advocacy groups, state police, and we work on ways to improve the, to make the Fells an even better, safer place for people to enjoy, and to also make a place that we protect and for future generations. One of the efforts that we've worked very closely with Friends of the Fells on has been the Be Kind campaign. You may have seen some of the signs in the Fells or on social media, but the Be Kind campaign is an effort to try to positively educate the public about being respectful of other people in the Fells, keeping their dogs leashed, picking up after their dogs, staying on the trails, being respectful of nature. And we're hoping that is starting to make a difference. We're also discussing with the DCR and state police how to step up enforcement efforts to try to get people to make sure they do follow the rules in the Fells, stay tuned for updates in that area. But the Fells is a gem, and we need to all work together to make sure that everybody can enjoy it safely and comfortably. And that's what we're committed to. Okay, what is the legislature going to do with the $3 billion collected in fair share revenue this year? Will it go to supporting struggling schools like in Stoneham? So I mentioned briefly earlier the fact that the fair share amendment, which is also known sometimes as the millionaire's tax, has been in place now for a couple of years, and it's so far has been enormously successful. As a reminder, it was passed by the voters at the ballot in, I think it was 2022. And I was proud to be the lead Senate sponsor of the Fair Share Amendment when it worked its way through the legislature for many years before that. And it applies a 4% additional income tax to households that make more than $1 million a year. So that is income, not assets. And also that $1 million threshold is adjusted for inflation every year. So that threshold actually goes up over time. And the revenue that the state receives can only be used for public education and for transportation. So what happened was that with the projection we had for how much revenue the state would receive last year was actually, we actually underestimated what it would be, and the amount that the state collected was actually substantially more than that, which was great news. And so the legislature and the governor were able to then make decisions about how to invest that surplus. And this fiscal year, which is ending in another week, we are once again going to have a surplus because there has been more fair share revenue paid in to the state than what we projected receiving. We've been using that funding to provide universal free school meals for all students in Massachusetts. We're one of the few states that's been able to do that after the pandemic was ended. So that's been phenomenal. It's helping families save money. It's making sure no kids are hungry in school and they're ready to learn. It's doing away with the stigma attached to students who previously had to sign up for free and reduced price meals. We've also been using that funding to expand access to higher education, free community college, and also much more assistance for students to attend our four-year colleges like UMass and our other public state colleges. We've been using it to help make those investments in early education and childcare for our youngest learners that I talked about earlier. And we've been also making major investments in the MBTA. I think everybody has seen the good progress we've made to improve the reliability and safety of the public transit system in the Boston area. And we've also been able to provide a lot more funding to cities and towns for local transportation improvements. So I know it's been a lot of inconvenience with all the roads that are getting repaved and sidewalks and intersections, but some of that is that additional fair share money that our cities and towns have been receiving from the state that is helping them to make those additional local infrastructure improvements. So that is, much of that would not be happening, if it weren't for the fair share money. And we are certainly doing as much as we can to support our communities and our school districts in particular. In the fair share supplemental budget we just passed, where we invested some of that surplus money, a good amount of that is actually going to help our school districts with special education costs, because we know that's one of the areas that's been really, really challenging for really all of our communities, because so many kids do need special education services, and some of the students need to be placed out of the district in special programs that can be, very costly. So we are using some of that fair share money to help reimburse our local school districts, for those special education costs. So that's definitely a way we're trying to help communities that are struggling. Stoneham has certainly been one of them, but many other communities in the ones in my district, but really all across the state have been facing very difficult fiscal challenges this year. So definitely the fair share is one of the ways the state is trying to provide more assistance. All right, let's see. We have I think this might be the last question, but if anybody has anything else you wanted to bring up tonight, feel free to type it into the chat before we wrap up. But this question is about efforts to reduce single-use plastic waste like bags. And the answer is absolutely yes. I'm proud to have teamed up with Representative Michelle Socolo, who's from Lexington. And a number of years ago, we founded the Zero Waste Caucus in the legislature. And we've been promoting the passage of a single-use plastic reduction bill that would certainly include plastic bags, but also other types of single-use plastics like polystyrene and plastic straws and so on. A version of that bill reached the Senate floor last session, and it passed the Senate, which was great news. Unfortunately, it did not get further in the legislative process last session, but Rep. Socolo and I refiled the bill this session. We have a lot of support for it, a lot of co-sponsors, and we're going to really push to not just get it to the Senate floor again, but hopefully the House as well. In addition to that legislation to reduce plastic waste in Massachusetts, we also are pushing to update the state's bottle bill, which is really out of date now and really very needs to be updated to include more containers and to increase the deposit amount. And we're also pushing for the state to take action in the extended producer responsibility space, or also known as EPR, which some states like Maine have done. That would make manufacturers more responsible for what happens to their products downstream, and also the packaging that they use for consumer products. So absolutely, that remains a priority for me personally, for the Zero Waste Caucus, and I know for the Senate President as well. So thanks for that question. Let's see. Lynn has a question about housing in our district, about the unaffordability of housing, and yes, absolutely. This is probably the issue that has been getting more attention from our state government than almost any other issue the last few years. It's become a top priority for the legislators. It's been a very high priority for Governor Healy and her administration. So last year we passed what's known as the Homes Act, and that is the biggest investment in housing programs in Massachusetts history. And that funding, will help to increase production of multifamily housing, addressing different price points. So some of that would be low income, some of that's middle income folks. But we've also required changes to zoning, and some of you, I'm sure, have heard of the MBTA Communities Act, which is requiring some changes and updates to zoning to allow for more multifamily housing to be built. We've made other changes like that over the last few years. So we are starting to see some of the benefits of that in our communities, and that is going to contribute to a greater housing stock, again, for both rental and home ownership at different price points. And hopefully that will start to reverse the trend, of the inexorable increase in rent and housing prices in the greater Boston area. Because if we don't reverse that trend, young people aren't going to be able to afford to stay in this area. Working families will have a hard time staying, or will have to continue to move further and further away from where they work. Seniors, don't have the option to downsize. So we recognize this is really, really a critical issue that we have to keep addressing. So we are looking at additional legislation this session. There's some strategies that I would like to see us consider, like a real estate transfer fee that would be applied to very high-end real estate sales, and then that funding would go into an affordable housing trust fund at the local level. That would provide more funds for our municipalities to support affordable housing projects. It was something we tried to get into the Homes Act last year, but unfortunately didn't make it in the final bill, but continuing to support that and other strategies like that. So thank you for that. Let's see, we have a question. What is the best place to see what legislators are working on? Yes, it is definitely easy to find bad news online. There is a lot of positive work going on, and it's so true that there is kind of a bias, in the media to sort of follow and report on things that may, where things are not going well, but not to really report on when things are just moving along the way they should and good things are getting done. So I think, hopefully you sign up for our newsletter, which you can sign up on our website, senatorjasonlewis.com. We do have a newsletter that we send out periodically with updates on what's happening. The Mass Legislature website also has a lot of information on it. So malegislature.gov. You can track the status of any bill through that website. So any legislation you're interested in, you can see where, what's happening with it. Those are definitely a couple ways. Governor Healy, I'm sure, has also her own, newsletter list or way you can sign up to be kept updated on what's happening. And she her administration very regularly puts out information on what's going on, across state government and key issues and legislation that she's promoting. So that's another great way to also know what's happening. And then, of course, you can follow me on social media, whatever you prefer, whatever platforms you prefer. We put information out almost every day on social media about what's happening. So that's another great way to stay informed. And just look for my social media pages on Facebook or Instagram or on X. All right. I think that we got to everyone's questions and feedback. So thank you all so much. As always, really appreciate your participation this evening. Please continue to stay involved in the process. We're going to try to continue to do everything we can at the state and local level to continue supporting our residents and our businesses and moving forward. We're going to continue to stand up for our values in Massachusetts. We're not going to be bullied by what the Trump administration is trying to do. We're not going to be cowed by them or back away, from what we know works in our communities and in our state. So let's continue to stand together and work together, and hopefully we can continue to make good progress. So thank you all very much, and thank you again to Paul from my team for his help this evening. Hope you all have a good night, and stay cool. It's going to be a hot period we're going through here. So thanks, everybody. Good night.